Schizophrenia cannot be understood without understanding despair, is a quote said by John Forbes Nash Jr., who you might remember being portrayed by Russell Crowe in the movie A Beautiful Mind. John Nash was a mathematician born June 13, 1928. He's best known for his accomplishments in game theory and algebraic geometry, and as you might have guessed, his diagnosis was schizophrenia. Nash's wife described him as erratic, as Nash's first symptoms of schizophrenia were paranoia. He believed all men who wore red ties were part of a communist conspiracy aimed toward him. This kind of thinking is common in those suffering with schizophrenia. Many believe people, governments, or even more bizarrely, aliens or entities are out to cause them harm. These thought patterns are commonly called delusions, a false belief or judgment about external reality, and these specific delusions are referred to as persecutory delusions, a belief that you are being persecuted by someone or something, and that thing is out to do you or your loved ones harm. Schizophrenia is often called the most stigmatized mental illness. It is a complex and sensitive topic that requires many hours of research and care just to comment on, as doing so without taking the time to learn about the disease could do major harm to those it inflicts and those touched by it personally. I'm not a therapist, nor am I a psychologist or psychiatrist, or anything in between, but I am a part of the 1% of the population with schizophrenia, and I do have a passion in trying to educate others on this misunderstood disease. So if you want an in-depth look at this illness from the perspective of someone who has to live with it every day, please consider sticking around.
There's a characteristic lack of interest in the environment, withdrawal from contact with others, and with it goes an increasing loss of emotional response. These people become vague and empty. Their manner is childish and they are gawky. They show little or no initiative and spontaneity. If they do react emotionally, their reaction is often inappropriate.
How long have you been here?
I think that'd be 14 months in December, beginning of December.
In this place?
Yes.
You like it here?
Yes, I like it when it's quiet.
Schizophrenia used to be categorized into 5 subtypes: catatonic, disorganized, paranoid, residual, and undifferentiated. Catatonic schizophrenia displays symptoms of absences from reality, where a person may become immobilized and unreactive to what is happening around them. They may still be able to register what is happening, just unable to respond to it. It is also possible for people suffering from catatonic schizophrenia to cycle between this unresponsive state to a state of hyperactivity, where they may become a danger to themselves or those around them. Disorganized schizophrenia relates to the fact that those suffering from the illness may have disorganized thought and unusual speech patterns. People with this subtype of schizophrenia may find it difficult to start and or finish tasks. Paranoid schizophrenia is the schizophrenia most people would be familiar with, and probably the schizophrenia I would have if these subtypes were still in effect. Paranoid schizophrenia is how it sounds, where the person afflicted becomes paranoid of his or her surroundings and people in their lives. Residual schizophrenia is when a person suffers a schizophrenic episode, but the delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized patterns don't persist. However, the negative symptoms do, which we shall get to shortly. And finally, undifferentiated schizophrenia is in short when a person experiences psychosis but doesn't fit into one of the subtypes of schizophrenia, and in a way that really shows why fundamentally the system did not work. Schizophrenia is a very complex disorder with varying symptoms, so trying to put them into neat categories often does not work. For example, I've had periods of catatonia where I was almost frozen in place for hours. I've had days where it's difficult for me to start or finish a task, and my thought pattern was erratic and disorganized. And I've had intense, all-consuming paranoia, so where would I fit in on these classifications? So that leaves the question, how is schizophrenia categorized today? Well, much like ASD, autism spectrum disorder, it is now on a spectrum. You have high-functioning schizophrenia, where a person can live a very functional, normal existence with the help of medication, and you have people who may not respond well to medication and may never be able to partake in a normal life. But the majority of schizophrenics are just ordinary people trying to live their lives. Now, these subtypes still exist on the spectrum, but they are not as black and white as they once were. It was explained well by Terry D'Arrigo, sorry if I got your name wrong. Now experts talk about schizophrenia as a spectrum disorder that includes all the previous subtypes. It's a group of related mental disorders that share some symptoms. They're like variations on a theme in music. Now, as stated earlier, there are negative and positive symptoms in schizophrenia. This can often be misleading to newly diagnosed people and their families, as when you hear the word positive, you immediately think of something good. This, however, is not the case. The positive symptoms refer more to the common understanding of schizophrenia, the delusions and hallucinations, whereas the negative symptoms could be more seen as depressive-like symptoms, such as a loss of motivation, the inability to feel pleasure, a flat affect, a lack of speech. These negative symptoms are the less talked about side of schizophrenia, but for the actual sufferer of the illness can be just as invasive. To this day, even though I'm medicated, and have very little symptoms, it is still pointed out to me in social settings that I am quiet and don't show much emotion. Another thing to note is the types of delusions a person with schizophrenia can experience. We've already touched on persecutory delusions, but there are many more delusions a person suffering with schizophrenia can experience, such as a delusion of grandeur, a delusion which makes you think you are more important or successful than you actually are. A common type of delusion I think most schizophrenics can relate to is a religious delusion. For some reason, religion plays a big role in the delusions that go with schizophrenia. I'd say half of my delusions are spiritual in nature, and it isn't an unknown fact the negative impact religion has on schizophrenia. That isn't to say religion or believing in a religion is bad, but for some reason schizophrenia latches onto it. The earliest hallucination I can remember was me seeing Jesus Christ walk down the aisle of our church, and I have countless hallucinations and delusions of demons and spiritual warfare. And many other schizophrenics I've spoken to online had similar experiences. I'm no expert in terms of a degree in psychology, but I do have life experience, so I feel comfortable giving my opinion on this topic. And the reason I believe religion influences schizophrenia the way it does is probably because religion plays such a pivotal role in a lot of our lives. Or at least for some people at one point it did. And schizophrenia usually feeds off fear. But what greater fear is there than disobeying your creator and burning in hell for the rest of eternity, or battling a foe you have no chance of defeating? A psychologist once said to me, schizophrenia is like a conspiracy theorist. If a conspiracy theorist goes straight into telling you the earth's flat, you'd never believe him. But if he starts with small and explains how if the earth is round, why is the table I'm writing the script on staying in place, and then the conspiracy theorist slowly starts building up the lie until he tells you the earth is flat, you may believe him. Same concept with schizophrenia. So you may have a thought such as I've been a bad Christian, I've sinned, and then you may think God's going to punish me for sinning by sending me to hell. Then you may think demons from hell are going to kidnap you and bring you down there. And this may sound ridiculous, but here's the thing. Psychosis is not a reasonable mental state. You truly believe heart and soul what you see and feel. It would be like you saying the sky is blue when everyone's saying it's red. To you, the sky is still blue. It doesn't really matter what anyone says. And that is what psychosis and schizophrenia really boil down to. When a schizophrenic says they are being followed by the CIA, they don't think the CIA are following them, they truly believe it. Schizophrenia in its simplest form is a break from reality, which sounds easy to recognize, but often the sufferer will hide his or her true feelings out of fear that their family and friends can no longer be trusted, or fear of being locked away in a psychiatric hospital, as media has led us to believe. This can make recognizing when someone needs help rather difficult, and often parents with children suffering a schizophrenic episode know something is wrong, but cannot put their finger on why. So how can you tell when a friend, family member, child, or sibling needs help? Well, there are key warning signs. The first one being depression and or withdrawal. If your loved one is usually outgoing and fun, or even if they seem like they're a bit lower and less engaged than usual, this could be a sign of depression and a withdrawal from society. In my experience, this often happens due to paranoia. No one can harm you if you never leave your room, and why would you want to leave it anyway when you have no motivation to do so? Depression often feels like an all-consuming black hole that sucks any joy you could feel away before you have the chance to feel it. It alters your thought patterns to expect and accept the worst out of life, when usually it isn't nearly as bad as one believes. If you notice this behavior and you are close enough to the person where they potentially share that they may be feeling suicidal, take these comments seriously. Even if you believe the person would never commit such an act, remember depression alters the way we think and can lead us down destructive and life-threatening paths. Take these threats seriously. It's always better to be safe than sorry. The second warning sign is hostility or suspiciousness. Hostility doesn't have to mean being violent, but perhaps you find yourself arguing with the person more than you once did, maybe even over trivial things that wouldn't normally matter. Suspiciousness is also a big factor. For example, maybe the person afflicted believes you're going through their things or are lying to them, and a mistrust begins to brew. Another red flag, maybe the person is hypersensitive to criticism and finds it very difficult to accept even the slightest judgment against them. Deterioration of personal hygiene. The person maybe stops showering or brushing their teeth. This could be from the depression or just because it's not in their current thought space with everything else they have going on. An inability to cry, express joy, or inappropriate laughter or crying. As mentioned earlier, one of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia is a flat effect, and this may cause a person to be unable to cry or express emotion, or they may have inappropriate outbursts of laughter, for example laughing for no reason, or laughing at something tragic or sad. I'm not sure why this happens, but it is a trait of schizophrenia. Usually, as a rule of thumb, if a person is emotionless, stares into space frequently, and has a very flat effect, it may be cause for concern. Oversleeping or insomnia. If a person is very tired during the day, this may be a negative sign. It is very difficult to sleep when you are paranoid and hearing voices, and sleep deprivation and and schizophrenia often do not bode well together. Odd or irrational statements. If the person is blotting out random words, making strange comments, or even making up words and expecting you to understand them, this is often a warning sign, or one of the clearer examples that something is wrong. I can safely say I had all of these symptoms leading up to my diagnosis, and still I was in denial something was wrong. Not only was I unsure why I felt this way because I had no prior knowledge of schizophrenia, I was also under the false belief that hearing voices was normal, and I was overreacting by not being able to cope with it. It sounds ridiculous, but I was delusional. And even when I did seek help, I was unwilling to tell people what I was experiencing because I was afraid of ending up in a psychiatric hospital for the rest of my life, because from the movies I had watched, that is where crazy people like me go. And not only that, but I had my voices telling me not to say anything about them for that very reason. So if I can give one piece of advice for someone suffering, is seek help sooner than later. I know it's cliche and everyone says it, but it is said for a reason. Schizophrenia is a demon too big to fight alone, and it is okay to ask for help. Hearing voices is not normal, believing people are after you and you've done nothing wrong is not normal, and it requires help from experts. If you take one thing away from this video, please take away that bit of advice. And if you are a concerned friend or parent, don't wait for something disastrous to happen, seek to help. The journey on medication is tough, and I'm not going to speak about it too much in this video, but it's better than the alternative of not being in your right mind.
I couldn't get it. How old? How long?
Huh?
How long have you been here?
Been here 900 years.
900 years.
Yeah.
That's
I
a
built
very
this
long
place.
time.
Sure.
Couldn't
He
have
built
been
up my
here.
yard, he built up his place. He buy chocolate, cigarettes. I pay, right? That's his story. When I have a job, we go on the ceiling. That's everything.
The Voices is a 2014 film starring Ryan Reynolds and directed by Marjane Satrapi. Sorry if I butchered that. It's about a man named Jerry Hickfang who lives above a bowling alley and works for a plumbing fixtures factory. He is a schizophrenic who lies to his therapist about his dog Bosco and cat Mr. Whiskers talking to him. Bosco is the lovable, soft-spoken, nice voice, whereas Mr. Whiskers is the malevolent, evil voice, constantly ridiculing Jerry and telling him how stupid he is. The story progresses to a point where Jerry invites his love interest Fiona to a Chinese dinner theatre. Unfortunately for Jerry, however, Fiona stands him up. But as he is leaving, Fiona's car fails to start, and she flags down Jerry. While Jerry is driving Fiona home, they hit a deer. Hallucinating that the deer is begging to be killed, Jerry does so. And understandably, Fiona freaks out and begins running into the forest, where Jerry chases after her, before falling onto her and accidentally stabbing her, then proceeding to repeatedly stab her, all the while apologizing to her. He then takes Fiona back to his flat, where he removes her head and places it in his fridge, only for the severed head to begin talking to him as well. The movie did pretty mediocre in terms of reviews, getting a 6.3 out of 10 on IMDb and grossing around $2.2 million. But why am I talking about a pretty mediocre movie from the early 2010s? Pretty much no one but me saw. Well, because it paints a pretty good picture on how schizophrenia is displayed in media. Now, I want to make it clear that I love this movie. I think it's incredibly underrated and I highly recommend it. But I'd be lying if I didn't think it negatively impacts people's view on schizophrenia. Jerry is a character that didn't intend to murder but did, and continue to do so. He's a serial killer that puts people's heads in his fridge, for the sole reason that he is schizophrenic. I found a review on this movie that gave it a pretty low rating, which again I must admit I disagree with. But in the review they said something rather interesting. It's very well made and I can't believe that this is how someone with this kind of mental illness sees the world and lives their life. Maybe I'm reading into this wrong, but this person either thinks two things about schizophrenics. Either he believes the average schizophrenic accidentally kills people and sticks heads in their fridges, or he believes all schizophrenics talk to their pets and lie to their therapists. Both of these are wrong. Sure, you could make a case that there was probably a person with schizophrenia that put people's heads in their fridges, and probably another who spoke to their pets, maybe even one that did both. But that isn't across the board. I've never had a pet speak to me, and I've definitely never killed anybody. Yet this person thinks this is a good portrayal of schizophrenia. Movies like this should be made and appreciated, but when intellectually disadvantaged people begin believing this is how all schizophrenics act, then a problem arises. I feel this wouldn't be such an issue if the average person knew anything about schizophrenia, but it's almost like this taboo thing where it's not talked about. So the only information people have about schizophrenia is from movies like these. So you can't really blame them for having a warped view of the illness. But it's fine me telling you schizophrenics aren't the serial killing violent individuals we see in the media, but what do the facts say? Well, it is true schizophrenics are more likely to be violent than the general population, but only about 10% of schizophrenics will ever be violent in their lifetime, and only about 6.5% of murderers have schizophrenia. In fact, schizophrenics are far more likely to be victimized than being the perpetrators of violence, up to 14 times more likely. Now, schizophrenic violence unfortunately schizophrenia does happen. You of course have the famous serial killers like Ed Gein, who did have schizophrenia, but also a very disturbed childhood. There are also disturbing cases like the man who stabbed his father to death in Dublin last summer with a World War II bayonet because his schizophrenia relapsed, or the man who stabbed his 80-year-old grandmother 20 times the day he was released from the psychiatric hospital. These attacks do happen, but again they make up the vast minority of schizophrenics. You also have those trying to fake schizophrenia to get off leniently in court, like Son of Sam, who said his neighbor's dog told him to do the killings, before later admitting it was a hoax. This also vastly increases the fear surrounding schizophrenia. So this brings us back to The Voices. If you have never been affected by schizophrenia, and you watch the movie The Voices, your first impression is going to be schizophrenics are violent. Maybe not even on purpose, they just are. And that isn't the movie's fault, as much as it is the individual's fault for basing an opinion on a serious topic based on an early 2010s comedy movie. But that was the early 2010s, the same era of film that gave us Adam Sandler's Jack and Jill. How has the stigma evolved since then? Well, we only have to look at TikTok to see its effect. What you just watched is a schizo post, a meme that relates to dark or even scary humor, and while they in themselves are harmless and a bit of fun, I even found myself laughing at a few. This is another example of how schizophrenia is misrepresented. It is made to seem deranged and bizarre, and TikTok being a site designed for impressionable children doesn't bode well. I can almost guarantee the majority of people watching these have never had an experience with schizophrenia, apart from these memes. And again, there's nothing wrong with memes poking fun at schizophrenia, but the people watching need to understand it's just a joke, not reality. TikTok is also not a harbor of acceptance for schizophrenics. There may be a lot of very positive and informative videos on schizophrenia on TikTok, but when you go into the comment section, it quickly turns sour, as most serious topics do when you expose them to children. It's either damn, I've had a weird feeling before, I too must be schizophrenic, or there's bugs under your skin, rip it off. I don't have an example of the latter, as in fairness to TikTok, it has done a good job taking those comments down. But if you've used TikTok before and been on the schizophrenic side of it, you've definitely seen it. So as a schizophrenic person, you were stigmatized in movies, media, and online. You were constantly made to feel like some kind of monster for people to point and poke fun at or be scared of. I usually don't tell people I'm schizophrenic for that very reason. I shouldn't be afraid to disclose my illness out of fear of judgment from ill-informed people, and neither should you. Schizophrenia is an awful illness that destroys lives and ruins families, but the people affected by it shouldn't be victimized. In conclusion, schizophrenia is an awful illness that inflicts unimaginable suffering on those it possesses. This mixed with the media's demonization of the illness makes it extremely difficult to live with, but there is hope. If you are suffering with schizophrenia, or affected by it, you can and will come out the other side. You just need to fight for it, and the fight is worth it. Even when it feels helpless, there's always hope, and you will persevere. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you took something positive from it. Either you've learned schizophrenia isn't a scary monster you once thought it was, you have hope as a family member struggling with someone close to you going through schizophrenia, or you yourself have schizophrenia and are hearing from someone with your illness that it is going to be okay. Whatever your circumstances, I sincerely hope you enjoyed my 20-minute rant, and before I go, I just want to say one more thing. If you stumbled across this video because you think you may be schizophrenic, don't rely on social media for the answers. Talk to someone you can trust, and seek professional help. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.